cycle,
What's
the covering up and the lying about the status of John Fetterman. We were told, oh, he mushes words together. And if he has this accommodation, it's just a hearing problem. They have not been honest with people from the minute this happened way back in the primary. They pushed this debate off as far as they could. It all came out tonight. There is no way to have watched this thing and analyzed it and said, this is fine.
What?
All right. Well, how about we get into the heart of this thing? Let's begin with video number one. Let's begin with this bombshell revelation coming from CNN. For those of you who don't know, CNN hasn't been the most honest news network lately and has lost massive support, and even the reputation is considered, they are considered the fake news network. Yeah, so when they speak the truth, it's like a shocker for me when I hear CNN now saying something that makes sense, or they have somebody on their platform that is talking common sense. So when you hear that, you're like, wow, that's CNN talking. You know, that's a rare thing for us to see. So in this video, he just tells it like it is, man, concerning John Fetterman's mental status, and it's just no gimmicks, man. He just said it like it is, and I really appreciate that. So how about we pause now and we take a listen to this?
A tied race. Overall tonight, I will just tell you, apart from this topic, I thought this was the unraveling of one of the biggest scandals going on in this midterm cycle. The covering up and the lying about the status of John Fetterman. We were told, oh, he mushes words together. And if he has this accommodation, it's just a hearing problem. They have not been honest with people from the minute this happened way back in the primary. They pushed this debate off as far as they could. It all came out tonight. There is no way to have watched this thing and analyzed it and said, this is fine. No way.
No way.
He did
Tell the truth. The truth.
release a letter from his doctor last week in a way to put a potential, an end to the conversations, where a medical professional described what any shortcomings he had, and he did not describe them as a cognitive issue whatsoever.
Right.
So I want to be very careful when we're talking about one's capacity and capability to do the job as if it translates immediately to one's cognitive understanding. I don't know that to be the case. Having said that, I don't know if voters who are looking at the power dynamic you speak of, Ron, will appreciate the nuance.
I think somebody who appreciated this in the moment and reported on it and was savaged, and that we ought to talk about tonight because we talked about her on the show a few nights ago, is the journalist Dasha Burns, who interviewed Fetterman and said he has trouble in small talk. He did not seem to be processing what we were talking about.
Lester, in small talk before the interview, without captioning, it wasn't clear he was understanding our conversation.
The savagery from the Fetterman campaign, from Fetterman's wife, from other journalists, from media outlets. She said she should have been fired. His wife said she should be fired and face consequences for what we now know was reporting the truth. Everybody owes her an apology for the way she was treated. We know tonight, everybody's been trying to slough this off like it's no big deal. It is a huge deal. I don't care what his doctor, the campaign. If that guy was my doctor and he told me I was going to be all right, I'd get a second opinion. Well, it's ridiculous.
I was thinking.
No, actually, I not.
Oh man, powerful, and he's telling the truth, and a lot of people may not agree with this, but when you listen to that particular debate with John Fetterman and Dr. Oz, you see very clearly that there was something mentally wrong with John and not his ability. Having gone through a stroke, I sympathize and I understand. A person who goes through stroke, it's not a very easy thing to bounce back from. But again, people can deny all of these things or neglect them. That doesn't change the fact something is wrong. Okay, something is wrong with the man, and he needs to be seen as that. Matt Walsh added his 2 cents on it, and he certainly put a nice spin on this. And I'm gonna let you take a listen to this. So Matt Walsh is commenting on that. I'm gonna let him do his thing. because he said things in ways that some will consider it to be offensive, but hey,
Your mind will speak.
the truth is the truth.
I guess, as presidential, to steal a joke from Ann Coulter that she tweeted this morning. Fetterman could barely string a coherent thought together, even before the stroke. He could barely do that. But then afterwards, it's a whole other deal. There's no hope at all. The debate was destined then to be a train wreck. And yet, against all odds, the disaster managed to exceed everyone's expectations. It was worse than we thought. It was as though there was a train wreck, and then an airplane crashed right into the site of the train wreck, and then a tornado came through, followed by an earthquake, followed by a wildfire. It was, in other words,
Wow.
the worst debate performance ever captured on film in the history of American politics. And that is still somehow, I think, an understatement. So the clips have already circulated widely on social media. There's probably no need to play them now, but we will anyway. Things started awkwardly enough with Fetterman saying hello to the audience and goodbye in the same breath.
What qualifies you to be a U.S. Senator? You have 60 seconds.
Hi, good night, everybody. I'm running to serve Pennsylvania. He's running to use Pennsylvania. Here's a man that spent more than $20 million of his own money to try to buy that seat. I'm also having to talk about something called the Oz rule, that if he's on TV, he's lying. He did that during his career on his TV show. He's done that during his campaign about lying about our record here. And he's also lying probably during this debate.
Well, it was only downhill from there. Though I will say that his greeting reminds me of myself anytime my wife forces me to go to a party. Hi, everyone. Good night. Okay, let's go home, honey. Let's go. But I'm usually forced to stay there for much longer than I prefer. And Fetterman was in the same situation. The debate only lasted an hour, but Fetterman couldn't make it more than 90 seconds before the full-on collapse began. So here he is trying to explain his plan to make higher education more affordable.
How exactly, Mr. Fetterman, do you propose doing that to make it more affordable for families?
No, I just believe, making it that much more, it costs too much, and I believe providing the resources to reduce the tuition to allow families to be able to afford it.
Good point. And here he is on the minimum wage. Listen.
And how can a man, with 10 gigantic mansions, has unwilling to talk about a willing wage for anybody? Imagine a single mom with 2 children, trying to raise with them, realizing making $31,000 a year, $15 an hour.
Yeah, those signal moms. You got to watch out for the signal moms. So you probably get the idea. There was one other moment, the moment that still managed to stand out as especially embarrassing, even amid all of that, when Fetterman was asked to explain his flip-flopping stance on fracking. Here's what he said.
Mr. Oz, I do want to clarify something. You're saying tonight that you support fracking, that you've always supported fracking, but there is that 2018 interview that you said, quote, I don't support fracking at all. So how do you square the two?
I do support fracking, and I support fracking, and I stand and I do support fracking.
Well, that clears that up. Now, where do the Democrats go from here?
Wow.
Their guy, not fit to be in the U.S. Senate, not fit to be anywhere really, except in bed at home, recovering. And everyone can see that now. It was put on display for the whole country to see last night. Do they acknowledge this plain reality and let the chips fall where they may? No, of course not, because acknowledging reality has never been a favorite pastime of the left. Rather, their favorite pastime, as we know, is playing the victim card. And they were quick on the draw after this debate. Liz Plank is a left-wing pundit who was one of the many blue checks on Twitter to repeat this agreed-upon talking point. She tweeted, Dr. Oz just gave a master class on how to bully people with disabilities. Yes, debating your opponent in a Senate race is now bullying. Ableism has become the leftist buzzword of the day. MSNBC got that ball rolling immediately after the debate. Listen to this.
One of the things you posit in your article is that Fetterman's campaign is hoping to turn his sort of vulnerability into an asset here. Do you think he did so on the debate stage tonight?
I think it's tough to say whether or not it will wind up being an asset with voters, but it was certainly an example of such remarkable transparency, the opposite of what the Oz campaign has sort of asserted, which is that he's somehow hiding something about his health. I mean, showing up for an hour debate, and it was, as he said, starting out, he said he was going to talk about the elephant in the room. You played the clip. He said, I'm going to miss words. And you could tell, I wrote in my story about how in my interview with him, there was a moment where he became frustrated and stressed out, and it made some of his communicative problems worse. And I think that this context, and what you described as the insanely high stakes of this election, this single debate, clearly this was a candidate who was feeling stress, and there was such intense scrutiny, often ableist scrutiny, on how he was going to communicate. And he just did a debate in front of, the nation, an audience of anyone who could listen. And it was so transparent. He did fumble. He did make verbal mistakes. And it was all on view.
Transparent. That's one way of putting it. I wish I'd been this clever back when I was in high school and I had to bring my report cards home that were never very impressive. And if I had thought to couch it that way when showing my parents, listen, Mom and Dad, I'm being remarkably transparent with this. What you can see here. Let's address the elephant in the room here, okay, guys? I don't study or do my homework, but I'm being transparent. I'm being vulnerable. Now, if you expect a United States senator, that a United States senator should be able to understand words and speak them, you are guilty of engaging in ableist scrutiny, we were just told. Indeed, as the left has explained, it is not Fetterman who should drop out of the race, but Dr. Oz, because anything less would be ableism. An Axios article quotes a senior Democrat official in Pennsylvania saying this, quote, I wished Fetterman was in a better place to clap back. Overall, I argue it wasn't great, but for us, it was still a draw. Mm-hmm. Remember in these next few weeks that Oz's campaign is spending tens of millions of dollars against a man with a major medical condition. How dare Dr. Oz run campaign ads? He shouldn't be campaigning at all. Fetterman has a major medical condition, which doesn't mean that he should drop out and go home, but rather that he should be given the position out of sympathy.
Wow.
That's the argument they're going with. And it's entirely consistent with the argument they make on many other subjects. It is bigoted to acknowledge reality. In this case, the reality that a brain-damaged man is not suited for the U.S. Senate. Our responsibility is to deny reality for the sake of the member of a victim group. In fact, from the left's perspective, if anything, the stroke makes Fetterman more qualified than he was before, because before it, he was just a, quote, cisgender white male, not a lot of victim points. Now he's disabled, giving him at least a few victim points, whereas previously he had none, and that's what qualifies him. Of course, the whole concept of ableism is absurd. To be ableist, apparently, according to how the term is used, is simply to make judgments about what people are able to do. And if that's what it means to be an ableist, then we should all be ableist. An ableist person commits the sin of being rational and realistic, of being aware of human limitations and taking them into account, of making decisions that are grounded in reality, believing that a person should be given a job if he's best able and qualified to perform the duties and functions of that job. This is ableism, evidently. And if it is, our country needs a whole lot more ableism of this type.
Wow.
And there's another point to be made about all this. Under normal circumstances, I would have sympathy for somebody dealing with the aftermath of a stroke. It is quite a sad thing to be unable to form words, unable to understand. But my sympathy in this case doesn't extend very far because Fetterman chose to stay in the race. He chose to continue pursuing power. He put himself in this position knowing he's unsuited for it. In a similar way, I have sympathy for people with visual impairments. I have sympathy. If you're blind, I have sympathy for blind people. I wouldn't make fun of a blind person. Who would? But if the pilot of an airplane has undisclosed visual impairments and chose to sit in the captain's chair anyway, then my sympathy for him dries up rather quickly. Because
Derek?
instead now I have sympathy for the passengers in the plane, especially if I'm one of them. He has chosen to put them at the mercy of his disability in a way that is unfair to them. And he deserves criticism for that. Harsh criticism. Same goes for Fetterman. Same goes for Biden. They are responsible for their choices. But they're not the only ones responsible. In both cases, immense scorn should be directed at the Democrat Party puppet masters who chose to keep these guys in their positions, in fact, pressured them to stay there, we can assume, knowing what a disaster it would be for them personally and, more importantly, for the country. And yet their guilt pales in comparison to the wives of both men. This, to me, is maybe the most important point here to take away from this. Fetterman and Biden have lots in common, and not the least of which is the fact that they both are married to awful, spoiled, manipulative, power-hungry women who have utterly failed to fulfill their responsibilities as wives. Jill Biden knows better than anyone, especially if she's a doctor, that her husband is incoherent and senile. She knows that. And yet she's propped him up, dragged him along. She kept him going politically so that she could ride his coattails to the White House. What Jill is doing is nothing less than elder abuse. I mean, it should be criminal what she's doing. And then there's Fetterman's wife, okay? She should have sat her husband down and told him that he cannot continue. She should have forced him to put his health first. That's what a good wife does.
That's right.
Like, forced to the extent of saying, you cannot do this. If you do, I am not going to be by your side. I'm not going to show up at the campaign. I am not going to do that. I'm not going to go along with you to your self-destruction.
No.
That's what a good wife would do. And every man needs a wife who will do that. Even if we aren't running for Senate, we all need wives who will look out for our health and for our well-being, even when we are not, because sometimes we don't. A man will hatch all kinds of crazy schemes and plans, some of them perhaps brilliant, but others disastrous and self-destructive. I mean, we think they're all brilliant, and maybe on occasion some of them are, but then others are very much not. And we need our wives to look out for us, just as we look out for them, though often in different kinds of situations. So a man will often need to be the voice of reason when his wife is getting herself into some sort of overly emotional personal feud or drama. That's when a man needs to be the one who's there, the voice of reason, talking some sense into her. A woman will often need to be the voice of reason when her husband has come up with some sort of insane idea that might lead to disaster. Women overreact to things. Men bite off more than they can chew. And they both see the other's blind spots. So together they make a formidable team if they're both fulfilling their obligations and loving each other in the ways that each need to be loved. But there are men who are too weak or too disinterested to speak up and give their wives the guidance they need. And there are women who are too greedy and personally ambitious to stop their husbands from extending themselves too far. This is what is happening in Fetterman's case and in Biden's and in many other marriages across the country. These women are not the only manipulative women who are taking advantage of their husband's hubris and stupidity. The difference is that the consequences in their case will be felt by the whole country.
Yeah, I said
it. He said everything that I wanted to say that I didn't want to say. Yeah, it's just the fact that John Fetterman was not in a good condition to win the election, and to lie about that and to not acknowledge that is to be dishonest. And I don't think we should be doing that. And that's not fair to the entire country as a whole. It's not fair. So this brings us to our next point in the Bible here. I'm going to share this and then we're going to move on to our next segment in our live stream here. So what we have, moreover, that shall provide all the people able men. I want you to know that this was as Moses was told by God to select people to carry out the duty that was too heavy for him in judging the people and so on. So the thing is, Moses' father-in-law Moses' father-in-law, what is his name? I think is Jethro, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, Jethro. So Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, said to Moses, "You will wear yourself out, man. Why are you doing all this work? You gotta know your limitation, buddy. You can't carry all this task. The task is too heavy for you. Okay, you need to know what you can do and what you can't do, and you need to know when you need to look for help. You don't want to become burned out." So Moses was burning himself out. So Jethro, his father-in-law, said, "You ought to look for capable men among the people, men who fear God, men of integrity who hate dishonest gain. So you ought to set these men over them as officials, over thousands and hundreds, 50s and tens." So what is the point? The point is God wanted people to take on the task that were able to do the task. Simple as that. God doesn't do this, well, let's have mercy because that person had an issue. It's just that if they can't do the job, they just can't do the job. Let's stop pacifying it because God is not going to change his perspective concerning that. That's what I'm saying here. So you get the point. Let's move on to another segment in our live stream today. Thank you, Matt Walsh, for saying it like it is again, as always.